Ok, listo. Ya está grabando, yo creo que podemos empezar.
Listo. ¿No viene más nadie? No sé si viene alguien más o estarán en YouTube.
Voy a mirar si están allá en YouTube, ¿vale? Si quieres, un segundito.
Dale.
Listo, si quieres podemos empezar y yo igual voy admitiendo a medida que van entrando. Bueno,
Listo. Entonces, pues nada. Bienvenidos a las personas que están aquí en Zoom y en YouTube. Estamos aquí con Natalia Celis de la Universidad El Rosario, que está trabajando en problemas de incendios forestales. Estamos también con Analisa Bonavita, que es de la Universidad Toulouse Capitol, que trabaja toda la parte de finanzas y migración. Y estamos con Lin Shahin, también de la Universidad Toulouse Capitol, que trabaja la parte de migración y cambio climático. Entonces, la idea de hoy es entender o mirar el cambio climático, los diferentes impactos del cambio climático desde diferentes puntos de vista, no necesariamente desde la ingeniería. Entonces, pues, muchas gracias a los que están aquí y a los que están en YouTube. Y podemos comenzar con Natalia Celis, que sería la primera presentadora de hoy. Gracias.
¿Ya me escuchan?
sí, te escuchamos.
Sí, 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 sí.
Buenas tardes. No puedo compartir pantalla. ¿Me pueden, por favor, dejar compartir?
Listo, creo que ya.
Sí. Listo. ¿Lo ven? ¿Qué están viendo? Sí.
Ya se ve.
Listo. Bueno, buenos días. Gracias por estar aquí. Hoy les voy a hablar sobre cambio climático, incendios forestales y la dinámica territorial en el Amazonas. Bueno, quiero comenzar hablando sobre la Amazonía colombiana, porque es donde está enfocado el proyecto. Esta cubre alrededor del 40% del territorio continental colombiano. En ella están presentes 5 biomas principales, donde predomina el bosque tropical con un 64%, y pues es bien sabido que tiene una importancia especial tanto nacional como internacional. Sin embargo, desde el año 2010, la tendencia de los incendios forestales en esta zona ha ido aumentando en número y en magnitud, y después del acuerdo de paz que ocurrió en Colombia, ha ido aumentando aún más. Entonces, la pregunta lógica es, ¿qué está pasando en el Amazonas? Para estudiar esto, decidí elegir un municipio, que es un lugar mucho más pequeño que dentro de los departamentos, y este municipio tiene especial importancia por cuatro factores. El primero, pues, es que está ubicado en la Amazonía colombiana. Este es el municipio que está aquí pintado de azul. El segundo es porque los incendios forestales han ido aumentando año tras año en esta zona, o sí, ha visto un aumento. El tercero es porque tiene un estatus jurídico interesante. Digamos que, como se puede ver en este mapa de la izquierda, hay un polígono naranja. Este es el estatus que les digo, las zonas del estatus, y el municipio es el que está pintado en azul. Es un estatus que se llama estatus de sustracción. Entonces, permite al gobierno colombiano, cuando lo decida, cuando lo disponga, cambiar el uso del suelo, para mejorar el bienestar de la población, sea dejando poner más agricultura o lo que disponga el gobierno nacional. Y por último, pero no menos importante, es porque ha sido un territorio importante durante, antes y después del acuerdo de paz que ocurrió en el país. Bueno, como mencioné anteriormente, los incendios forestales han estado aumentando en esta zona, en esta municipalidad, en este municipio. Y pues este primer gráfico nos muestra el comportamiento de los incendios desde el año 2013. Los círculos verdes indican dos momentos importantes. Uno de ellos es en el 2016, cuando se firma el acuerdo de paz, si bien no se ve un cambio significativo pues, en la tendencia inter ni intraanual de los incendios. Sin embargo, cuando ya se empezó a implementar el acuerdo, es decir, empezaron las acciones, digamos que de desmovilización este tipo, se ve un aumento significativo en los incendios. Eh, pues llega, es un récord hasta el día de hoy, donde se presentaron por lo menos 100 anomalías térmicas o puntos de calor, también se les conoce, y que es un valor similar al enero de 2022, que pues se puede ver que se está produciendo cada vez más estos tipos de eventos con picos tan altos, cada vez más en espacios de tiempo más cortos. Bueno, para determinar si existe un comportamiento cíclico durante el año, yo decidí dividir estos incendios forestales por temporadas. Entonces, vemos que en esta gráfica inferior están divididos el año por temporadas, donde DAF, o sea, diciembre, enero y febrero, tienen la mayor cantidad de incendios de forma significativa, pero también marzo, abril y mayo son meses de especial importancia, es decir, estas dos primeras partes del año son los meses donde más se está incendiando este municipio. Bueno, por ende, el objetivo es un poco entender, diseñar estrategias de la mitigación informadas, pues mediante la comprensión de la interacción de factores climáticos, socioeconómicos, meteorológicos, que de alguna u otra forma están determinando la dinámica de los incendios forestales en este municipio, que es el Cartagena del Chairá, es el nombre del municipio. Y bueno, para esto, pues la metodología está basada básicamente en evaluar tres factores principales, que son pues las condiciones socioeconómicas, la cobertura del suelo y las variables meteorológicas y climatológicas. En cuanto a las variables socioeconómicas, fueron 10 variables evaluadas, se tomaron a partir de información secundaria y, por ejemplo, algunas de ellas son el número de población urbana, pero también rural, por la característica del municipio, el índice de pobreza multidimensional, también variables relacionadas con masacres, reclutamiento forzado, desplazamiento, pues por el contexto en el que en el que se vive en el municipio o se vive en el municipio. Para la cobertura del suelo se hizo una clasificación utilizando imágenes satelitales. Los datos meteorológicos vienen de datos de reanálisis de ERA 5 y los climáticos vienen del modelo CIMIC 6, que pues de alguna u otra forma tener como un approach de cambio climático me ayuda de alguna u otra forma a hacer estas estrategias en un contexto donde puedan ser un poco más informadas, puedan ser usadas a largo plazo, pero bueno, se va a hablar de eso un poco más adelante. Todas estas variables que yo les mencioné anteriormente fueron la entrada en un modelo de una red neuronal, un modelo de Machine Learning, para establecer cuál es la importancia de cada una de estas variables o cuál es la incidencia de cada una de estas variables en los incendios forestales. ¿Cuál de estas podría importar más o menos a la hora de que exista o no un incendio o a la hora de que se promueva un incendio forestal, ¿no? ¿Y para qué? ¿Para qué me sirve saber cuáles de estas variables son las más importantes? Porque de alguna u otra forma yo puedo priorizarlas y si las priorizo, pues estoy ahorrándole al Estado o al ente que se encargue de crear las políticas a tiempo, en logística, en dinero, ¿no? Entonces, para esto me sirve toda esta priorización de políticas. Bueno, esto es un tema un poco más técnico. Así es como está construida la red neuronal. Como les mencionaba, todos estos son los inputs o variables que entran en la red. Es una red neuronal convolucional. Esta es la estructura. Y la idea es que salgan los incendios forestales, ¿no? Ok, ¿y cuáles fueron los resultados? En cuanto a las características meteorológicas, digamos que se hallaron anomalías térmicas, que quiere decir, ¿cuál es la diferencia de estas variables meteorológicas o el comportamiento de estas variables meteorológicas en días donde hay incendios y no hay incendios, ¿no? Entonces, aquí hay algunas variables que les estoy mostrando, como la temperatura, la humedad relativa y la precipitación. Las muestro porque son las que tienen un cambio más significativo o más importante. Y, por ejemplo, se puede ver que el aumento en la temperatura es superior casi 5 kelvins en los días que hay incendios forestales en la primera mitad del año, es decir, diciembre, enero, febrero, marzo, abril y mayo, que son las temporadas donde vimos que se presentan la mayor cantidad de incendios. Por su parte, en esos mismos meses donde más hay incendios, en los días que hay incendios de esos meses, la humedad relativa y la precipitación es inferior en comparación con los días de esos meses donde se han presentado incendios en el histórico, ¿no? Em, bueno, digamos que en cuanto a la evaluación de los escenarios de cambio climático, yo tomé 4 escenarios de cambio climático, pero pues acá solo voy a mostrar los dos. Dos, el más extremo y el menos extremo. En cuanto a la anomalía climatológica del RCP 2.6, digamos que la temperatura no sube tanto, que es el escenario en el que la temperatura sube menos. Y en este escenario, la humedad aumenta y la precipitación también aumenta. Digamos que esta combinación de comportamiento de estas variables no promovería, no ayuda al decrecimiento, solo no promovería de forma directa, digamos que el spread de los incendios forestales. Mientras que en el escenario donde sí, hay un mayor aumento de temperatura, que es el RCP 7.0, pues aumenta mucho más la temperatura y aquí sí disminuye la humedad y disminuye la precipitación, como ocurre en los días de incendios forestales que nos muestra la meteorología. Bueno, entonces aquí ya sabemos que estos tres, digamos, variables meteorológicas son las más importantes: aumento de temperatura, disminución de humedad relativa y disminución de la precipitación. En cuanto a la distribución espaciotemporal de la cobertura vegetal, digamos, también hay hallazgos muy importantes porque dentro del municipio solo se encontraron eh, dos coberturas que son las más importantes, digamos que los matorrales y el bosque abierto, se llaman así. Pero ¿qué es el bosque abierto y qué son los matorrales en el contexto de la municipalidad o el municipio? ¿No? Digamos que acá podemos ver que los matorrales están asociados al color amarillo y están al lado del río, bordeando el río es el río Caquetá, que pasa por la municipalidad, mientras que el color morado pues está asociado al bosque nativo, bosque inexplorado, bosque donde no ha habido intervención. Y la pregunta aquí es, ¿qué está pasando ahí? ¿Por qué tiene esta característica tan particular? Y esta es un poco mi línea de pensamiento, es entender, ok, ya sé que hay matorrales, pero ¿a qué se le está asociando los matorrales? ¿No? Entonces, digamos que existe literatura en el Amazonas, en otras partes del Amazonas, que dicen, los matorrales están asociados a la agricultura. Entonces, este es un mapa de agricultura oficial que saca un instituto del Amazonas colombiano y podemos ver que sí, uno, la agricultura a lo largo de los años ha ido aumentando en su extensión a lo largo del río. Y dos, tiene pues, el mismo comportamiento que tienen los matorrales que vimos en la diapositiva anterior. Entonces, los matorrales en esta zona es uno a uno con la agricultura. Pero además de eso, ¿ok? Ya sabemos qué hay ahí, pero ¿dónde están los incendios? ¿Los incendios están asociados a la agricultura? Sí, lo están. Este mapa de mano derecha son los incendios desde el 2010 al 2022 en el municipio y pues es clara la relación uno a uno que hay entre la agricultura y los incendios forestales en esta zona, ¿no? Eh, bueno, ya sabemos que la agricultura es importante, pero además sabemos que por la literatura, cuando existe incendios asociados a agricultura, hay variables socioeconómicas que están fuertemente relacionadas con el fuego. ¿Cuáles son esas variables? Entonces, para conocer y para saber cuál va a ser el enfoque de las estrategias que se hicieron, fue importante entender cuáles eran las variables y cómo afectaban. Entonces, ¿cómo se hicieron los escenarios? Porque se hicieron escenarios para evaluar las variables socioeconómicas. Y se hizo a través de una frase, o el principio fue una frase: ¿cuál es el impacto de, por ejemplo, la población si yo la aumento en un 30% o la disminuyo en un 30% en los incendios forestales, ¿no? Aquí hay solo 4 ejemplos. El aspecto más importante es entender el eje Y, que es obviamente valores negativos disminuyen los incendios y valores positivos aumentan. Eh, ¿Qué pasa? Entonces, la estrella azul oscura es, ¿qué ocurre con los incendios forestales si aumento en un 30% la población? Y la estrella clarita cian es, ¿qué pasa con los incendios forestales si yo disminuyo en un 30% la variable? Entonces, vamos a ver un ejemplo. Por ejemplo, si yo aumento la población total, digamos, no la urbana ni la rural por separado, sino la población total, ¿qué sucede con los incendios forestales? Yo lo estoy aumentando. Si yo aumento la población, los incendios van a aumentar. Y digamos que esto está ampliamente estudiado en la literatura, sobre todo por Armenteras, que es una española que trabaja en la Amazonía colombiana, y ella habla que está asociada a la colonización. Entonces no necesariamente extranjeros de las mismas personas del departamento, del municipio, van llegando a nuevos sitios inexplorados, incendian para limpiar el terreno y para cultivar, ¿no? Entonces, bueno, hay otro que es muy interesante, que es el Low Educational Level, que es ¿qué pasa si yo, por ejemplo, educo a las personas bajo este indicador, que es el bajo nivel educativo? Según el modelo, según los escenarios que hicimos a través del modelo, si yo disminuyo en un 30% o, digamos, educo a la población, los incendios van a aumentar, ¿no? Digamos que aquí también ha sido estudiado por varios autores y algunos argumentan que puede estar asociado porque de alguna u otra forma la población está más interesada en tecnificar cómo se está labrando la tierra, cómo se está haciendo las prácticas agroecológicas, que podría haberse afectado, pues cómo es el uso del suelo. Digamos que son datos técnicos que hay que tener mucho cuidado, porque, por ejemplo, en cuanto al desplazamiento, es un tema muy delicado en Colombia. Y lo que a mí me está diciendo el modelo es que si yo aumento el desplazamiento, va a disminuir los incendios forestales, ¿no? Entonces, pues claramente nadie está sugiriendo que haya más desplazamiento, simplemente es porque está sucediendo, porque pasa. En Colombia, los grupos armados se refugian en la selva colombiana, evitan que las personas abran el bosque, haya bosque abierto, porque es donde ellos se ocultan, es donde ellos hacen sus actividades ilegales, donde tienen sus laboratorios, etcétera. Entonces, digamos que de alguna u otra forma impiden que siga el curso normal de las prácticas agroecológicas de la comunidad, pero pues de ninguna forma se va a sugerir que exista más desplazamiento, ¿no? Ahora, para avanzar, y digamos que basándome en las estrategias ya existentes en el municipio y nuevas propuestas que pues a través de literatura se obtuvieron, se diseñaron y priorizaron estrategias en 3 principales temas, que es uno, la cobertura de suelo, porque se vio que es muy importante; dos, la economía; y tres, la dinámica social. Digamos que la meteorología no es algo que se pueda controlar a través de políticas, y entonces pues no valdría la pena mencionarlo más allá de tenerlo en cuenta, igual que el approach del cambio climático, ¿no? Entendiendo qué es lo que va a suceder en el municipio. Por esto, hay 5 temas, sí, para cada una de estas 3 maxi temas, o sí, de estos temas como cobertura económico y social. Y la idea es construir, o se construyeron de la forma más completa cada una de las estrategias hechas, que pues ponerlas acá sería un poco tedioso, pero por ejemplo, como hablábamos del desplazamiento, en términos numéricos, en términos de la salida del modelo, me dice, es bueno desplazar gente porque disminuye la cantidad de incendios, pero de ninguna manera lo va a hacer. Por esta razón es que estos resultados deben tener un enfoque de desarrollo territorial, y en este caso específico las estrategias estarían o están enfocadas, las construidas, primero en el fortalecimiento del liderazgo gubernamental, que haya presencia del Estado en estas zonas, eh, y que este Estado encabece la restitución y la tendencia de las tierras de los campesinos con un enfoque de acuerdo de paz, ¿no? Porque este, como les mencionaba, este territorio es importante para el acuerdo de paz, es decir, víctimas y victimarios reinsertados que puedan tener tierra, que puedan, pues, generar un ingreso a raíz de la tierra. Pero ¿cómo? ¿Cómo lo van a hacer? ¿Cómo lo han venido haciendo? Digamos que para esto es importante generar o establecer una educación formal y no formal, así como financiación externa e externa, para que se promuevan prácticas agroecológicas y que pues vayan encaminadas hacia la bioeconomía, que es que es la economía que se está gestando en el continente, ¿no? Y en el actual gobierno. Este es solo un ejemplo de cómo una sola estrategia abarca los tres más macro temas y a su vez los mini temas de cada uno de estos. Pero pues la idea es que cada una siga esta lógica y que se encadenen entre sí. Eh, pup, y bueno, las conclusiones son, pues la primera, que el cambio de la cobertura vegetal está relacionado principalmente con la agricultura a pequeña escala, ¿por qué? Porque las grandes productores o los que tienen muchos extensión de tierra generalmente tecnifican el campo y lo hacen a través de maquinaria y no el fuego, según lo que se ha visto en Colombia, en la Amazonía colombiana y la literatura. Y se da sobre todo alrededor del río Caquetá, que es el río que vimos porque es la fuente de transporte más fácil y más rápida en este municipio. Ahora, la temperatura, la humedad relativa y la precipitación son los tres componentes más importantes a nivel meteorológico que podrían promover o que promueven los incendios forestales ahí. En cuanto a las variables socioeconómicas, la temperatura, la desigualdad y el desplazamiento son las variables que tienen como mayor relevancia asociada a los incendios. Y por último, pues estas estrategias buscan abordar la cobertura vegetal, la economía y los factores sociales, sí, los factores sociales, para hacer un hincapié, como les mencionaba, en que las medidas sean sociales, que mitiguen los incendios forestales y promuevan la gestión responsable de la Amazonía y pues del territorio. Bueno, muchas gracias por su atención.
Muchas gracias, Natalia, por la presentación. No sé si alguna de las personas que hablan español tienen alguna pregunta. Si no, yo sí tengo una. Yo tengo una y es, ¿cuál crees que es el driver social más importante, driver social económico más importante de los cuales has estudiado?
Digamos que la desigualdad es uno de los
Ujú.
factores más importantes. Em, el nivel educativo también es muy importante, tiene uno de los valores más altos y diría que hay un indicador que se llama el desempleo a largo término, que es como a un año. También es importante porque por lo que abarca, sí, los tres, esos tres.
Ok, ok, perfecto. Eh, Creo que no hay más preguntas. Casayas tiene una pregunta, Alejandro.
¿Qué drivers crees que son mejores o más importantes, los sociales o los meteorológicos o los económicos?
Yo creo que, o sea, a nivel de importancia, los meteorológicos son los más importantes y sobre todo porque no se puede hacer mucho desde la política, ¿no? Pero en el territorio creo que los económicos son los que determinan cómo las personas están haciendo la gestión del territorio.
O sea, ¿tú crees que si hacemos una mucho mejor gestión del territorio podemos reducir los incendios así la meteorología trate de, digamos,
Digamos
producirlos?
que hay algo que no se puede controlar, pero con la gestión del fuego, que pues tampoco quisiera satanizar el fuego, sí puedes reducir el riesgo, sobre todo estos magno incendios que no se pueden controlar porque llega un punto donde no da la parte logística, nadie sabe cómo hacerlo, no hay bomberos, entonces creo que hay una parte que tú no puedes controlar, que además de ser naturales, pues sí, pero desde la gestión sí puedes darle manejo al fuego.
Ok, Gracias, Natalia, por la presentación. Seguimos entonces con Lynn Shahin, que sería nuestra segunda interventora. Perdón. The second, I will change to English now because she speaks English, so she will be the second presenter of today. Thank you for the people on YouTube. We will change to English now. So Lynn will make a presentation about climate change and migration. She's an expert on migration, doing her PhD here at the Toulouse University of Capitol. And the floor is all yours.
Thank you.
Can you hear us?
Can you hear me? Yes, I can hear you.
Can you hear me better now? Okay, perfect. Then I was saying I will jump right into the presentation. Let me share my screen. Perfect. Thank you to Carlos, to Alejandro, and to the university for this invitation. Today, I am going to be talking to you about the impact of climate change on migration. I am a PhD at Toulouse School of Management, and I am in the field of researching about migration and the migration of people across the world. To start, I will introduce what is climate change. It refers to significant changes in global temperatures and weather patterns over time. I am sure a lot of us have heard about this, as it has been recently a major topic for discussion in corporate world, in the industry, as well as in academia. Although climate change is a natural phenomenon, in recent decades, human activities have accelerated the process. So yes, it's not something new or something that has just occurred, but it has been amplified over time due to human activity. And this is what we are going to discuss today. How humans have amplified this process, but how this process or this consequence have also affected human life. The difference between weather and climate is that weather is more or less a short-term atmospheric condition, so what it feels like today, what the temperature is like this week, but climate is a long-term average of weather patterns. So in general, how has the weather been changing over time? This is what we classify as climate. Key components of climate change are global warming, which is also something that is very heard about lately. Global warming is the increase in the Earth's average surface temperature due to rising levels of greenhouse gases. Global temperatures have risen by about 1.2 degrees since the late 19th century. While this might seem a small change on such a long period of time, it has had drastic implications on what we know as life on Earth in terms of animal behavior, in terms of human behavior, and in terms of consequences. The last decade was the hottest on record, for example. So yes, this change was 1.2 degrees in maybe a century or two, but the hottest records that we have are in the latest periods of time that we have measured. Greenhouse gases are carbon dioxide, CO2, methane, and nitrous oxide, trap heat in the atmosphere and accordingly cause the Earth's general temperature to rise. The direct effects of these change are there's an environmental impact, there's an impact on biodiversity, and there's a human impact. I will mention them briefly and discuss how they all affect what we are going to be talking about today. Environmental impact includes melting glaciers. So the ice caps in the North and the South Poles, for example, have been melting. This has increased the sea level across the world. Rising sea levels, changing precipitation patterns. In terms of diversity, threats to wildlife and the ecosystems, which has also affected how humans live with the ecosystems or within ecosystems, and how changes in animal behavior and so on has also affected human life. And human impact is the increased frequency of extreme weather events on human well-being and life, which has or could have health risks on people and individuals, as well as create economic challenges for these populations across the world. To go deeper into what migration is, it is the movement of people from one place to another within with the intention of settling temporarily or permanently in the new location. This movement can be within a country, such as internal migration, so from one city to another, from one region to another, or between countries, which is international migration. You completely leave your country and move to another one. Your intentions could be temporary or permanent. So you plan to stay in the new country permanently, or you are moving temporarily because of something that has happened or something that could happen, and you plan to come back to your country of origin or city of origin. The different types of migration are voluntary and forced. So when we say voluntary migration, we are talking about individuals or groups of people who move by choice. They decide to move for whatever reason, and often for economic opportunities, education, or family reunification. So to meet a partner, to settle with a family member, for economic opportunities, so better jobs, or for example, because temporarily they could want to move to another location to change the lifestyle, or to take a permanent, temporary position somewhere. Forced migration is when these individuals, or when individuals or groups have to move or are compelled to move due to factors such as conflict, persecution, natural disasters, or environmental change. In this scenario, they don't really have a lot of options. They cannot really make the decision as they please, but rather have to move because of something that has happened, which is forcing them to do so. Climate migration is a combination of the two factors that we have discussed, climate and migration brought together. It refers specifically to the movement of people caused by changes in the environment or the climate. This includes movements triggered by natural disasters, gradual environmental changes, and the impact of climate change. So it could be an occurrence that just happened, such as a natural disaster that has happened before and is still having an impact on human life. It could be due to environmental changes or climate, which is long-term environmental change. Climate migration can be short-term or temporary, or long-term / permanent. This is more or less the same as how we categorize migration. However, in short-term or temporary climate migration, the movement is due to sudden disasters, so you maybe don't anticipate them or anticipate them a bit before and make the short-term change in accordance. Sometimes we will discuss some examples. Sometimes it could be to avoid a tsunami, to avoid a volcano eruption, to avoid a hurricane, but you do have the expectation that when the situation gets better, you will return to your home, or you will return to your country or city of origin after the situation has improved. Long-term or permanent climate migration is movement due to permanent or severe changes in the environment that make returning impossible or unsustainable. Sometimes what happens is things that are outside of our control, but also things that cannot be reversible. So for example, when we have flooding because of the melting glaciers, or we have rising sea levels, these are events that are very hard to reverse and to change. So accordingly, it might not be possible for one person in one lifetime to witness a reverse in this situation. With the proper tools to equip future generations to try to reverse these situations, it could be possible. However, for one lifetime, it might not be possible for one person to witness the reverse, and accordingly, we call this long-term or permanent move, because as the situation is not going to change, there is nothing that they can do about it to return to their homes. Examples of past migratory behaviors due to events that have caused it are the Dust Bowl, for example, in 1930s in the USA. There was a severe drought in the US where the soil, or the topsoil, was blown away by heavy winds, because it was so dry it could not stay on the ground, and accordingly farming was impossible, and it was impossible for people to grow crops. At the time, this was a very important thing for sustainability and the continuity of families. So as it could not be reversed, families from Oklahoma, Kansas, Texas, and surrounding states had to move to other states where the drought was not so severe, such as California, in order to be able to continue living the way they usually do. The Syrian drought from 2006 to 2011 is a more recent example. This example has also had has also contributed to other problems, and we are going to see one of them. It was caused by a severe drought in the area, which prevented agriculture from being able to grow crops. For the livestock, so for animals to be able to feed on these crops and to have continuity or prosperity. The impact of that was that there was very traumatic economic hardship, which created political unrest, which created social pressure, and accordingly is one of the driving reasons that started the civil war in Syria, because of the famine and the hunger that the people were exposed to. Also, a consequence of that was that millions of Syrians were displaced internally within the country, as well as externally to countries that are neighboring, such as the Arab world or Europe. Two more examples that we're going to see are the Hurricane Katrina happening in 2005, where it was labeled as one of the deadliest and most destructive hurricanes in the US history. It hit the coast with a catastrophic impact. The impact was mainly on New Orleans and surrounding areas, experienced massive flooding. So there was a flood after the hurricane, property destruction, loss of life. There were a lot of casualties. Hundreds of thousands of residents were displaced, with many relocating to other states. They tried to rebuild the city, and in this scenario, a lot of them tried to come back after the after the damage was salvaged or controlled in a sense. The Argentinian Patagonia and desertification in the late 20th century, and is perhaps still ongoing until these days in Argentina. Over the past few decades, the Argentinian Patagonia has experienced increasing desertification, which means that the trees and the wildlife, the forests, have been dying or have been destroyed. This process is driven by a combination of climate change and unsustainable land use practices that have led to the degradation of the land. The impact of this is the loss of fertile land. So it was very hard, again, for farmers to grow the trees, for the environment to sustain its temperatures, and for economic activities to continue as they usually had. Current examples that we see in our day-to-day nowadays are the flooding in Venice, for example, where the level of water has been on a rise, affecting the houses or the civilizations in the region. There is frequent flooding that disrupts the daily life and damages it. This is also known as the acqua alta, which means high water, and is due to change in climate that is causing this increase in the water level. While Venice has not seen large-scale migration yet, it has seen migration that is comparable to some other countries, because there are noticeable trends of people wanting to leave the city. This is due to increased cost of living, having to always have maintenance fees in order to rebuild your houses, to fix them, to adjust them to the leaking, to take care of that. And this has driven many people out of the city, wanting a more stable and a more cost-efficient, cost-effective lifestyle. Water scarcity in the Gulf region is also another ongoing problem. And here I'm trying to show different examples from countries across the world to show that this is not a region-specific problem, but rather a worldwide problem that we are seeing. In the Gulf region, including countries like UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, they face challenges related to scarcity of water. These countries or these cities were also known to be desert cities. However, over the time, they have tried to battle these environmental conditions by creating, empowering people with tools that will fight these droughts or this scarcity in water. However, because climate change is increasing and is increasing negatively in the sense, their attempts have been battled where environmental stress of overexploitation of groundwater resources and degradation of natural habitats is observed. And the economic impact of that is that water scarcity affects agriculture, industry, and overall economic development, preventing normal course of life in these countries. Consequences of climate migration, if we keep going in that sense, of course, they are things that we have already seen, but there are things that could also be amplified or could erupt in regions that have not yet seen these problems. Some of which are the increased vulnerability of displaced populations. When people have to move in bulk, they are usually, if they are moved by force, they are perhaps considered refugees in certain countries. They are considered to have left, for example, after a hurricane, you don't take all your belongings, you just leave with whatever you can. You leave trying to save yourself. This puts them at a vulnerability where they don't have everything that they need to continue their life normally. It puts strain on their resources and on the resources and services of host environments that need to take in these people. So after a natural disaster, after a huge migratory wave, societies that accept these people have the same limited number or limited amount of resources, yet it has to now provide for more people to accommodate them. Health challenges, when you are from a country that was always very warm and now is experiencing, you had to move to a country that is cold because of whatever reason, you might experience health challenges because of this drastic change in temperature, and the reverse scenario is also true. This creates a vicious cycle of heat waves, coastal floodings, crop failure, and water scarcity. When we have heat waves, as I said before, the ice caps or the glaciers are melting and the water level is rising. This is creating coastal flooding in areas that are near the sea, in areas that are near the oceans. And in a lot of them, they experience crop failure because of either flooding or, on the other end of the spectrum, because of drought. So this also brings us to water scarcity. While we say if we have flooding, why do we have water scarcity? The difference is that they are in different regions. So when one region is experiencing excess in water, the other is experiencing lack of water. Both of them are equally traumatic. The water cannot be transposed, and accordingly, both of them suffer from consequences of climate migration or climate change and migration due to climate change. To end on a more positive note, recommendations that we could do in order to fight this is to transition to renewable energy sources. For example, solar sources, hydro sources, wind, using elements that nature is providing us, the sun, the water, the air, to produce energy instead of needing other non-renewable energy sources to produce the energy that we are consuming, will help the sustainability of the environment. Creating efforts of sustainable development, such as integrating climate considerations into development planning, urbanization, putting more trees in the cities, using less emission generating powerhouses or cars, using more public transportation, using the land policies more properly. So when farmers when we create policies for farmers to use and we force these farmers or they abide by the policies, they preserve the land, they preserve the fertility of the land in order for the land not to dry up, for the plants to be able to grow, for the crops to be able to renew their life or renew their life cycle. And accordingly, we have more sustainable environments that can help to keep people in their homes, that can help to fight the climate change and can help people fight the need to move from one country to another or from one location to another because of climate change. There are a lot of factors that we cannot control. Climate change is one of the factors that on the long run, with the right amount of effort, we can aim to change or we can aim to reverse. With this, I end my presentation. Thank you for listening. Thank you to the people who are joining us not on Zoom or on Zoom. I am open for anyone who might have any questions. Please let me know.
So I have one small question, maybe.
Yes, of course.
So in the future, you think that refugees could be a problem for the country that they will go, or maybe they could be something good for the place, like you could have something good, not only bad things could come from refugees. What do you think?
I think it depends. First, we need to take into consideration that refugees come from a negative background. So they come from a disadvantage where they had to move for whatever reason. Now, entering the host country, they could have resources, skills, tools that the host country needs. And in this case, they would be good for the environment that they are settling in. So if I need farmers and I don't have enough farmers, and the refugees that come are farmers, then they can help me create a better environment where I can grow crops, they can help with the tools, they can help with the agricultural information that they have. Yet at the same time, if I am a country that is not ready to accept farmers or I don't have the tools to equip them with what they need, then I am also unable to benefit from their expertise. So it is a very intricate dynamic between the two, where the country needs to be able to make use or benefit from these individuals, and the individuals need to have the right skill set to benefit the country. If these two ends of the spectrum are not managed, they will not meet in the middle. So it will be really hard to benefit from them. And then in the negative sense, you will have people who are a burden. So it is beneficial to try to mitigate the situation, but also it is noteworthy to know that if you don't mitigate it properly, you have an influx of people that will be negative for your environment. You have more strain on your resources, on your environment, on your you have financial pressures, economic systems. It is both.
So thank you, Lynn, for the presentation. I think we have no more questions. Now the floor is for Annalisa. She is also part of the doctoral program at the University of Capitol, and she will talk about something more regarding companies. So the floor is all yours, and all yours.
Thank you. Just a second, I'll try to share my screen. Thank you very much. Thank you, Carlos. Thank you, Alejandro, for organizing. I will share with you my current research. It's more a theoretical paper I'm working on. So, and as Carlos just presented, I'm looking really from more organizational strategic point of view, and specifically to the challenge of climate change from the point of view of individuals. What individuals can do, how their activity regarding climate change impact their professional life and their personal life. So specifically, I'm looking at a category of individuals that are employees, first of all, and specifically, I'm looking at the millennial dynamics. I will go further with my presentation in more detail. So talking about climate change, we actually discussed already. Thank you, Natalia. Thank you, Pauline, to actually explain in more details what is really climate change, what is the impact on people, on economic, on, of course, environment, biodiversity. I'm looking from an academic and business point of view. As you can see from the left-hand side, this graph, it comes from the World Forum, Economic Forum, sorry, is a 2023 survey that has been conducting on around circa 1,500 experts, not just from the business world, but also academics. And they show that actually extreme weather events, critical change to Earth systems, so climate change is the top, we pose the major challenges to our society. We know that actually, of course, each of us has a role to play to avoid these challenges, and but business world has a major role to play in this specific context. But the system as it is so far is not, it needs to evolve. The model needs to evolve. So when we're talking about climate change, we're talking, for instance, about CSR activities, and we're talking about the involvement more and more the engagement of all the stakeholders in the supply chain. We're talking about not just the organization themselves, we're talking about customers, we're talking about the supply chain and so on. But why not including also the employees? Employees can be both primary stakeholders and catalysts of change for climate specifically, and for organization generally speaking. In particular, I'm talking about, when we're discussing about employees and climate change and the catalyst for change, we're discussing about a specific form of activism. Employees activism in particular, is not a very new concept. It's born in the 70s, actually, in the US. And at the very beginning, it was more regarding inequality issues than climate issues. And at the very beginning, these kind of employees, they were, say, really as troublemakers. It's just in the 90s that the concept, the managers, the executives start to look at them and see them as really trailblazer. So they really can make possible some activities that organization, the strategies from an executive level is not possible to see. Those are just few examples. For instance, in the Amazon, when the employees strike actually to support Amazon, including cutting some ties to big oil, or some other example from Google's. But what we see from some researchers is really that specifically millennial generation, employee organization that actually demonstrate a genuine concern for the environmental impact and contribution. So we are not discussing only greenwashing activities. We know discussing only advertisement. We're talking about real action to make a real impact on the environment. Also, some other sources, very recent one, a Deloitte survey from 2023, showed that the majority of adult employees prioritize really sustainability in their work life. And it's the same for a recent survey conducted in France, the CSA Institute in 2021. 8 out of 10 employees prefer company committed to ecological transition. But talking about a bit it's been explored in the literature, because we know that a significant portion of the management scholar investigation has already addressed the green challenges, addressed very extensively climate change. But from a social science, specifically from a strategic point of view, the focus has been always on the organizational level. And the focus has always been try to mitigate risk to shareholders' value and explore the potential avenues for business expansion. So there is always a business case around. It's a way to solve let's say, CSR strategies transition. The engagement of employees in starting environmental action has received already some attention, but very limited, and specifically the employees have always been seen so far since, let's say, the last 10 years as receivers of CSR strategies. For instance, what's the impact if an organization starts a CSR strategy? What's the impact of these strategies on retention, well-being, and so on? There are very few recent studies that actually started to investigate these phenomena as grassroots strategies. What does it mean? Grassroots strategies, we're talking about strategies from a bottom-up. So before, the literature discussed from a top-down perspective. Recently, we started to see it from a bottom-up. So the organization, also the academic work, start to understand the importance of studying these activities to accelerate the required ecological transition, and so to address actually today's challenges. In particular, so when we're discussing about grassroots or bottom-up activities, we're talking about a different focus of CSR. CSR is corporate social responsibility, is always like a big umbrella term, we can say it, that has been studied, as I said, from a macro perspective. We now started to look at it from a micro perspective on analysis. And so far, there were two actually main way to explore this micro CSR. One from a psychological foundation that is really looking at individual perception and reaction, and that is mainly fostered by organizational behavior and industrial psychology, where the other side is then the sociological aspect. That is actually mainly focusing on the political and identity aspect that actually these employees or CSR professionals are experiencing in their daily life. What is the limitation of this dual approach? First of all, there is a risk of lack of holistic understanding of the phenomenon that more and more deserve a further understanding and study. There is a missed opportunity for cross-fertilization because we're talking about organizational behavior, strategy, management, HR perspective, and policies that can actually be studied together with an approach that is not so well defined and divided into different branches. Of course, there is the other side of the issue can be potential for redundant research, and the potential also to actually have blind spots, so that the narrative can be either redundant or also incomplete. And of course, there is a lack like practical implication. There is a big risk that actually the implication of the research, they are not so effective as we would like to be, or we would like for them to be. So what actually I'm currently studying was my, let's say, problematization here. I'm looking at how generational dynamics can influence specifically millennial-driven employees' activism within the organization. So I'm looking to merge the sociological aspect that is coming from generational identity and cohort effects, and motivation and the more psychological aspect that is coming from motivation and identity. And actually how these two different approach can actually catalyze in the millennial-driven internal activism, how they shape this specific kind of activism. But why specifically millennial? First of all, 75% of the global population by 2025 will actually, of this specific population, so millennials will have a higher managerial position, so they will have a big impact on the strategy of company and generally societal policies and business world, generally speaking. 64% of worldwide surveyed millennials express confidence in their ability to instigate organizational change. This is really interesting when you see it in comparison with another trend that has been object of many surveys and articles discussing really the duality of this generation. So from one side, they are really committed and they are sure they can actually instigate change in their company. At the same time, they're still at the generation of job hoppers. So they can actually change jobs very easily compared to previous generation, but they also have like a large commitment in the organization in which they work if it comes to sustainability and environmental transition. And this is really the specificity of this generation that makes them the best probably sample to study to support employees' activism. This is the conceptual framework I'm developing with my research. So I'm looking to see from generational identity cohort effect that's coming from the societal part, job satisfaction and motivation that is coming from the psychological aspects, how they influence employees' activism, and therefore, as I look at what is the outcome from the organization, what's also the individual outcome. So how this activity actually shaping the career, the personal life of this activism. It can be a career progression, but there are high risk of burnout as well, many challenges in the daily to daily job. And of course, how this in loop can impact job satisfaction and motivation. And of course, the final outcome will be foster environmental transition. So really see how these activities, these employees' activities, by supporting, foster organizational change, they can actually support them for the environmental transition that needs to be happen much faster than we actually are doing so far. In terms of contribution, there are several from a point of view theoretical one. So first of all, it's really a contribution to the ongoing debate regarding micro CSR. The bridging the gap between sociological and psychological aspects, and also try to participate to actually contribute to the growth of what is called a climate-proof academic debate. It is a part of academic debate that is really looking at the issue of climate change and how companies, business can support environmental transition, trying to go behind the economic aspect. So try to escape this idea of business case all the time. From a practical point of view, of course, from a strategic point of view, try to understand the mechanism and the loop around all the different psychological and sociological concepts can contribute to employees' activism. It can be beneficial for the company itself, supportive culture, provide engagement opportunity, recognize contribution to sustainability. This is something it's already partially explored in the literature. What is really beneficial as well is that the company will be more and more able to attract employees that will be more and more feel that are empowered to drive significant change and environmental impact. And of course, tries to support individual effort, because so far the literature focuses on individual, but it's not enough to actually show and display the real power of these employees. Future planning for future research can be really a mixed method, and it would be really interesting to see, as we discussed, it's a very complex and holistic analysis, so it will need a mixed method approach. They will include some qualitative and quantitative analysis, and what it will be really interesting to apply is what is called a fuzzy set qualitative comparative analysis, that I think in this specific case, to really understand what is the impact, which factor really impact these behaviors, and what is really the impact of this behavior on the organization and on the people itself. It's really an interesting way to create some shade and to give like a real 360 view of what is the real impact, what actually we can do to support more these employees eventually, what are their challenges. We can actually, allow me the word, exploit more their activities, how we can actually allow them to drive and to sustain organization in their actually journey to environmental transition. So just a few takeaways. Very important, understand the relation between organization sustainability and the role that employees can play, the critical role in fostering environmental transition. Important also to understand this dynamic, this difference in generation. So how this duality in the generation that is becoming the most important generation in the next few years in terms of role, executive roles, so drivers for real change. And also a call for future research that will need like a more holistic approach, mixed method, comparative qualitative analysis to actually understand a phenomenon that is very complex. I think it deserves a more holistic approach. So I will leave you just with a nice quote. The greatest threat to our planet is the belief that someone else will save it. I think all of us today, we're trying our best to support environmental transition, fight against climate change. So thank you very much for listening. If you have any question, I'm very happy, you're very welcome, and I'm very happy to address it. Thank you.
Thank you, Annalisa. I don't know if there is any questions from the floor.
Yeah, I have one question, and it's curiosity. So you said that we as millennials have something that is called job hoppers, but I was wondering why, in terms of psychology, or at least, or yeah, why?
It's a very good question. Thank you, Alejandro. This is something very interesting to understand because I didn't still need to conduct my own research. What I'm bringing so far, it's my understanding, is that there is a mix of dissatisfaction in terms I cannot fulfill myself in my job place, and there is a mix of opportunities. There are more opportunities. We live in a much more globalized world, so it's easier for us to change and find other opportunities somewhere else. What is really interesting is to see why a millennial that has more opportunity, more tendency to change jobs, actually is willing to stay in a company and start this kind of activity that sometimes can be really challenging. We don't talk just about fighting again C-level leaders. It's really also try to engage colleagues, taking, like, sometimes these activities are not part of their job description. The majority of the time, they're doing it on a voluntary basis. So it's like time consuming. You need to engage people. You need to have access to funding sometimes, budget information. It's a lot of work. So this is really what I'm trying to understand. Why these millennials are so driven to change inside the organization when they can easily change organization and find someone else that is meeting their needs more easily. So it's a very good question. Thank you for asking. I hope I answer your question.
I do have another question.
Sure.
Do you think companies not engaged with climate change or not engaged with climate transition or anything like that will have a problem getting employees or high quality employees?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Carlos. I think already now there are some surveys that show that employees decided prefer if you propose them the same, let's say, job role and salary and so on, they prefer to go to companies that are really engaged. And we're discussing, this is very important because we don't discuss only about what is called greenwashing, companies that are really doing something, generally speaking, about sustainable change. There is a big stress on climate impact as well. So definitely yes. And I think the more and more organizations understand how to engage, also how to allow their employees to actually start these voluntary activities, the more they will be able to hire, I think, higher quality and more engaged employees. That I think is the best fit a company can have, because it's not just about skill. You have like corporate, you need to have employees that are really engaged with the company itself. So it's really important to have this characteristics. So yes, absolutely, I fully agree with you. Thank you.
You're welcome. I don't know if there is any other questions. Well, if there is no more questions, I would like to thank the Universidad Sergio Arboleda. Thank you, Alejandro, for bringing this together, and also, of course, Eli and Carmen Cecilia for giving us the opportunity to be here. Thank you to all the participants here and in the YouTube, and maybe we see us next time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.